A few weeks ago, headlines broke that the US wants to withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany, and it's been quite a big topic here in Germany ever since. So what does this mean for Germany and Europe and the US? Let's take a look. Hallo, Servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany. Spent the last 9 years living in the US, in Cincinnati, Ohio, but I actually just moved back home to Munich together with my American husband, Ben. And here on my channel, I talk a lot about the cultural differences between the two countries, and as of recently, how my husband is experiencing them here in Germany. But I also talk about more serious topics, such as what Germans teach about World War II and the Holocaust, or the opioid crisis in the US, or how Germans feel about the American military bases in their country. That video is from early 2024. I'll be sure to link it down below for you guys, because for the last few weeks, that's been quite a hot topic again, at least here in Germany. I noticed that in the US, it didn't get quite as much media coverage, so in case you missed it, let me fill you in on what happened. At the end of April, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz was visiting a school located in the center of Germany and participated in a panel discussion. And when answering a question about the war in Iran, he said this.
Die Amerikaner haben offensichtlich keine Strategie. Und das Problem bei solchen Konflikten ist immer, da muss man ja nicht nur rein, da muss man auch wieder raus. Das haben wir ganz schmerzhaft bei Afghanistan gesehen. 20 Jahre lang. Wir haben das im Irak gesehen. Also diese Geschichte ist, wie gesagt, zumindest unüberlegt. Und ich erkenne im Augenblick nicht, welchen strategischen Exit die Amerikaner jetzt wählen. Zumal die Iraner offensichtlich sehr geschickt verhandeln oder eben sehr geschickt nicht verhandeln. Und die Amerikaner da nach Islamabad reisen lassen und ohne Ergebnis wieder abreisen lassen. Da wird eine ganze Nation gedemütigt durch die iranische Staatsführung, vor allem durch diese sogenannten Revolutionsgarden, weil die Iraner offensichtlich stärker sind als gedacht und die Amerikaner offensichtlich auch in den Verhandlungen keine wirklich überzeugende Strategie haben. Wenn ich gewusst hätte, dass es 5 Wochen, 6 Wochen so weitergeht und immer schlimmer wird, dann hätte ich es ihm noch eindringlicher gesagt.
So it's pretty clear that Merz doesn't think that the war in Iran was a good idea, and he also doesn't think that the US currently has the upper hand in the conflict. And of course, the statement also reached American President Donald Trump, which is why he posted this on Truth Social the next day. The Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. He doesn't know what he's talking about. If Iran had a nuclear weapon, the whole world would be held hostage. I am doing something with Iran right now that other nations or presidents should have done long ago. No wonder Germany is doing so poorly, both economically and otherwise. President Donald J. Trump. A couple days later, he took another shot at Merz. The Chancellor of Germany should spend more time on ending the war with Russia and Ukraine, where he has been totally ineffective, and fixing his broken country, especially immigration and energy, and less time on interfering with those that are getting rid of the Iran nuclear threat, thereby making the world, including Germany, a safer place. And he announced, the United States is studying and reviewing the possible reduction of troops in Germany, with a determination to be made over the next short period of time. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Which, by the way, isn't a topic that's completely new. Back in 2020, during Trump's first term, he wanted to withdraw about 1/3 of all US troops stationed in Germany, so 12,000 soldiers at the time. But Congress didn't end up approving it, and when Biden came into office, he dismissed those plans and instead sent additional troops to Germany to strengthen NATO against Russia. This time, however, it seems like the plan might actually work out, because just a couple days later, the American Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did indeed order the withdrawal of approximately 5,000 US troops from Germany, which created quite a lot of turmoil here. The withdrawal is supposed to take place over the next 6 to 12 months, and according to media reports, the US also canceled the planned deployment of long-range missiles in Germany, which many experts consider an even bigger issue than the troop withdrawal itself. Following a 2024 agreement made under the Biden administration, these weapon systems were scheduled to arrive in Germany this year and were supposed to include Tomahawk cruise missiles, as well as other advanced weapons, with the goal of strengthening deterrence against Russia. In addition to this, Donald Trump also announced that he would increase tariffs on cars and trucks from the European Union to 25% from the previously agreed on 15%, which will hit Germany particularly hard as Europe's biggest car manufacturer. So many experts believe that these decisions are some sort of punishment for Germany and the entire EU as a response to Merz's statement about the Iran war and the overall criticism from European partners. Even though officially the Pentagon says that the troop withdrawal is part of a broader review of US military strategy in Europe and is simply meant to bring troop levels back to where they were before Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Now, in the middle of all of this, a little over a week ago, news broke that the US also canceled an already underway deployment of over 4,000 troops from the 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team to Poland. But Vice President Vance later clarified that the deployment was only being delayed and not fully canceled. According to CNN, this decision was, again, based on frustration with European nations who have, quote, not stepped up when America needed them. And this decision has been heavily criticized by both Republican and Democratic lawmakers. Congressman Joe Courtney from Connecticut said that this was sending a horrible message to US allies. And here is what Republican lawmakers Mike Rogers from Alabama and Don Bacon from Nebraska had to say.
We don't know what's going on here, but I can just tell you, we're not happy with what's being talked about, particularly since there's been no statutory consultation with us.
I know this wasn't your decision. This was the Secretary of Defense's decision. But I got to tell you, it's reprehensible. It's an embarrassment to our country what we just did to Poland. There is no good explanation why we just removed 2 armored brigades from Eastern Europe. Do we know if Poland was notified by the Secretary?
We don't know.
Well, I already know the answer because they called me yesterday. They did not know. They were blindsided.
Even in the bias comparison here on Ground News, we can see that left-leaning and right-leaning media are equally criticizing this move. Ground News is a great way to stay up to date on current affairs without having to sift through dozens of sources to get the full story, because Ground News collects the whole spectrum of the coverage in one place for you. That's why I partnered with them for today's video, which of course means that you can get a nice discount, so stay tuned. For those of you not familiar with Ground News, you always get a summary of the story here at the top. You get to see the bias distribution. In this case, the story was slightly underreported in right-leaning media, with only 28% of the over 260 total sources being on the right side of the political spectrum, 38% coming from sources in the center, and 34% from the left-leaning sources. Down here, you get an overview of all of the individual articles on this story. Again, you can easily compare how the headlines differ across the political spectrum. And to add even more transparency, you can see who the outlet is owned by, which can be relevant to identify potential agendas, and how factually accurate the publication typically is. And what's super important to me is that this also includes news outlets from around the world, including Germany and many other countries. That way, you can get a pretty good idea of how the rest of the world is talking about these developments. Of course, Ground News will also put together a personalized news feed for you based on the topics you've selected as your interests. You'll also have a local news feed, and my favorite feature is the blind spot feed, which features news stories that have been disproportionately covered by only one side of the political aisle and may have been a total blind spot for the other side. This is such a great tool to see what news coverage and discussions look like outside of your personal content bubble. And that's truly something that we all need in today's day and age, where everyone seems to live in their own little echo chamber, and we barely ever consume the same information as others. This story about President Trump's high disapproval ratings got zero coverage by right-leaning media, for example, while this story about Zoran Mamdani not attending the Israel Day Parade hasn't gotten any coverage by left-leaning media. If you want to start using Ground News as well, just scan my QR code or go to ground.news/Feli to get 40% off of the Vantage plan for unlimited access. You can use Ground News as an app on your phone, in your browser, or even as a browser extension that will provide additional info whenever you're reading a news article outside of Ground News. So just use my link to save 40% today and easily stay informed without the hassle. Because keeping up with all of this is not exactly easy. The newest development is that 1 week after the troops heading to Poland were put on hold, President Trump announced that due to his good relationship with Poland's President Nawrocki, the US will be sending an additional 5,000 troops to Poland. Now, does that mean that the troops that were already supposed to be sent to Poland are going after all, plus some extra? Or is this in addition to those troops? None of that has been officially clarified yet. The only thing we do know is that the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, said at the foreign ministers meeting in Sweden last Friday that the announcement about Poland has nothing to do with the troop withdrawal in Germany. And what we do know for sure is that Congress actually decided last year that the total number of US forces in Europe cannot drop below 76,000 for more than 45 days without consulting Congress and NATO allies. This was part of the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, which was passed with bipartisan support. So as of right now, the US Defense Department is somewhat limited in how many troops they can withdraw at once. That being said, the total number of US military present in Europe is currently estimated to be at around 80 to 100,000 troops when counting permanently stationed personnel, rotational deployment, and temporary forces. So withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany would most likely be acceptable under this rule, regardless of what's going to happen with the numbers in Poland. Germany currently hosts about 35 to 39,000 US troops on a total of 20 military bases, which makes Germany host to the second largest international US military presence after Japan. Most of the bases are located in the south and southwest part of Germany due to the location of the former US occupation zone after World War II. The largest and most famous base is Ramstein Air Base near Kaiserslautern, but you might also know of the location in Grafenwöhr in northern Bavaria, which is the largest US training area abroad, or the Hohenfels training area, just to name a few. The history of these military bases goes all the way back to post-war Germany, when the Allied powers divided Germany into 4 occupation zones. The British, French, and US occupation zones later became West Germany, while the Soviet occupation zone became East Germany, aka the GDR, which existed all the way up until 1990. West Germany, on the other hand, was only occupied for a few years. In 1954, the Paris Accords officially terminated the occupation, but it still allowed the Allied powers and a few other NATO members to have military stationed in Germany for defense purposes, which, with the Cold War going on, really came in handy. So for decades, Germany was home to military troops from the UK, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Canada, and of course the US. At its peak in the mid-1980s, up to 250,000 US soldiers were stationed in Germany. Then, once the Cold War was over in the 1990s, most of these countries fully or almost fully removed their troops from Germany. The US, however, decided to keep tens of thousands of troops in Germany, which was welcomed by the German government at the time, and it was very practical for the US military as well, due to Germany's strategic location in the center of Europe. The Ramstein Air Base, for example, has functioned as a logistics hub for countless international military operations, and the Landstuhl Medical Center, right next to Ramstein, has been one of the most important American military hospitals outside of the US for decades. Critically injured US troops from regions in the Middle East and Europe are usually flown out to Landstuhl first before being transferred to the United States. And because that hospital has become a little outdated over the years, the US military is currently building the brand new Rhine Ordnance Barracks Medical Center in that area for over $1.5 billion, which is going to be the largest US military hospital overseas. And those aren't the only strategically important locations. 2 out of 6 regional combatant commands of the US military are headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany. The United States African Command and the European Command, which is responsible for all of Europe, the Caucasus, Russia, and Greenland. And Wiesbaden, in the German state of Hessen, is home to the headquarters of the US Army in Europe. So when people claim that the US military is solely in Germany to do Europeans a favor and help defend them, that's a common misconception. In reality, having US military stationed in Germany derives from a mutually beneficial agreement that has always been welcomed and criticized at the same time by Americans and Germans alike. If you want to learn more about how Germans feel about the US bases here, be sure to check out this video for more details. But one of the biggest points of criticism has always been that the US stores approximately 100 nuclear weapons on their military bases in Germany. And secondly, that Germany doesn't fully know what's happening on the bases and whether or not German and international law is being violated, with drone operations, for instance, where civilian casualties are unknown. On the other hand, having a US military presence in Germany does help deter potential attacks from other countries, especially during the ongoing war in Ukraine. And the bases have a lot of economic impact too, because most of them are like a small town in and of themselves, with stores, movie theaters, American schools, restaurants, etc. And it's not just the active military members who come to Germany for their deployment, they also bring their families and thousands of civilian employees. The Kaiserslautern military community alone, which is where Ramstein, as well as a couple of smaller bases are located, is home to almost 60,000 Americans. And not only do those people rent homes here in Germany and spend their money at local businesses, they also hire German civilians for some of the jobs on base. Overall, it's estimated that the US military presence generates a yearly revenue of $4 billion in Germany. Now, of course, as of right now, it's just 5,000 troops that are supposed to be withdrawn, which makes up only about 13% of the total troops stationed in Germany. So for the entirety of the German economy, this isn't going to make a huge difference. But for the towns directly affected by it, this is a big deal. And one place that's most likely going to be impacted by this is the small Bavarian town of Vilseck, where the 2nd Stryker Cavalry Regiment is permanently stationed, which consists of approximately 5,000 troops. So the numbers line up, and there have been media reports that this is the regiment that's supposed to leave. Now, the town only has about 6,500 German residents, plus about 10,000 Americans, which means that they make up about 2/3 of the total population. And if they really all left, it would change a lot for local business owners, landlords, and pretty much the entire town. Here's what the mayor of Vilseck, Thorsten Grädler, had to say about the consequences this would have for the region.
Seit ich weiß, sind die Amerikaner ein fester Bestandteil unserer Bevölkerung. Also ich könnte mir Vilseck ohne Amerikaner gar nicht vorstellen. Es geht los bei ganz normalen Dingen, wenn Sie zum Einkaufen gehen, in Einkaufsmärkte, in Supermärkte, wenn Sie in Gasthöfe gehen, in Restaurants. Da ist es ein ganz normales Bild, dass Amerikaner, meistens mehr Amerikaner als Deutsche, dort sind, auch im gesellschaftlichen Bereich, im privaten Bereich. Es gibt Freundschaften, die über Jahre und Jahrzehnte hin entstanden sind und gepflegt werden. Es gibt Partnerschaften, es gibt Ehen. Die Kinder der amerikanischen Mitbürger spielen in Fußballvereinen. Wenn wir Feste bei uns haben, wir sind ja eine Kleinstadt, da gibt es viele kleine Feste, die Vereine veranstalten, und sind häufig mehr Amerikaner als deutsche Besucher da, weil sie ein Stück weit auch die deutsche Geschichte kennenlernen wollen. Also es geht über alle Bereiche. Wir sind, dass sie natürlich auch bei uns hier in Vilseck wohnen, Wohnungen und Häuser gemietet haben. Wenn man jetzt mal über Vilseck hinaus guckt, über die anderen Gemeinden, die an den Truppenübungsplatz angrenzen, wir sprechen von einer jährlichen Wirtschaftskraft von 650 bis 700 Millionen, die vom Truppenübungsplatz ausgeht. In Form von Aufträgen, die an deutsche Firmen vergeben werden, in Form von Kaufkraft, wenn die Leute zum Essen gehen in Restaurants und Gaststätten, hier einkaufen, und dass 3000 Arbeitskräfte, deutsche Arbeitskräfte, zivile Arbeitskräfte am Truppenübungsplatz Grafenwehr arbeiten. Und das ist ja nur ein Bruchteil dessen, wenn man berücksichtigt, dass auch viele Firmen von außerhalb für die US-Armee im Truppenübungsplatz arbeiten. Baufirmen, Firmen, die Dinge liefern und dergleichen mehr. Also die wirtschaftliche Bedeutung nicht nur für die Stadt Vilsek und für den Landkreis Amberg-Sulzbach, sondern für die gesamte nördliche Oberpfalz ist ein riesiger Wirtschaftsfaktor. Es hätte für uns eine katastrophale Auswirkung, weil man könnte natürlich diese Wirtschaftskraft nicht ersetzen, aber was für mich doch das Schlimmere wäre, jahrzehntelange persönliche Bindungen, die gesellschaftliche Integration unserer amerikanischen Freunde, die wäre dahin, wenn sie nicht mehr unmittelbar da sind.
Of course, aside from economic and social consequences, another major concern is how would the troop withdrawal affect Germany's security and the security of Europe as a whole? The answer is that, as of right now, security experts don't actually see a big issue with 5,000 troops being withdrawn from Germany because it is a relatively small number compared to the overall number of troops in Germany and Europe as a whole. So that's manageable for the country, and if the troops actually were just being moved from Germany to Poland, nothing would change in terms of security at all. In fact, Germany's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Johann Wadefuhl, said in an interview that he very much welcomes NATO troops being stationed east of Germany. At the same time, these recent signals from the US are making many people question how committed Washington really is to NATO. And a major concern is the cancellation of the long-range missiles that were supposed to be sent to Wiesbaden this year. Those were supposed to be a response to the nuclear-capable missile systems that Russia has stationed in Kaliningrad.
The decision that's far more important is the announcement that the Pentagon won't be sending a long-range weapons capabilities that the Biden administration had promised to Germany, because that is a capability that is almost exclusive to the United States, that Europe does not possess, would take a fairly long time to produce on its own. And not sending those would leave a, shall we say, an open flank in Europe's conventional deterrence and defense. Then there is the unfortunate linkage with the announcement of 25% tariffs on European car industry, which will also hit Germany disproportionately.
Das ist tatsächlich das zentrale Element einer Abschreckung, weil es hier um Raketen geht, die in der Lage sind, Russland schon im Aufmarsch, also nicht erst, wenn es an die NATO-Grenze kommt, sondern deutlich früher zu stören und Kommandozentralen auszuschalten. Es hat deswegen eine extreme Abschreckungswirkung, die wir zurzeit nicht besitzen, von der Reichweite her und auch mit den gesamten Aufklärungsmitteln, die dahinter stehen, nicht. Das heißt, wir sind hier auf die Amerikaner erstmal noch angewiesen zum jetzigen Zeitpunkt. Dass das nicht kommt, schwächt die NATO-Abschreckung und macht, und das ist das Paradoxe, einen Einsatz der Amerikaner im Rahmen der NATO wiederum wahrscheinlicher. Das heißt, insgesamt sind wir hier in einer ziemlich schwierigen Situation und die Amerikaner reduzieren ihre eigene Sicherheit in dem Zusammenhang.
And Christian Mölling isn't the only one saying that the troop withdrawal isn't in the best interest of the United States. Some commentators in Germany have even pointed out that this move plays directly into Putin's hands. An author of the newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung commented, dass Trump nun die geplante Verlegung ausgerechnet dieser Einheit stoppen lässt, nachdem er zuvor mal wieder eine Stunde mit Putin telefoniert hat, könnte man, wäre man Pessimist, fast schon als Einladung an den Kreml interpretieren. And even Republican lawmakers in the US have voiced criticism about that. Senator Roger Wicker and Representative Mike Rogers, both chairmen of the Armed Services Committee, have published a joint statement emphasizing that the troop withdrawal is sending the wrong signal to Vladimir Putin. They also state that, quote, Germany has stepped up in response to President Trump's call for greater burden sharing, significantly increasing defense spending, and providing seamless access in support of Operation Epic Fury in Iran. And they're right, Germany has in fact been rearming over the last few years, and along with other NATO members, committed to increasing their defense spending to 5% of the GDP last year.
We have been told, in fact, by the first Trump administration, to take on greater responsibility for European self-defense and deterrence. And the second Trump administration has made that even more clear. We have had time to prepare for this. At the same time, I'd say that this is a bit of an own goal for the United States. punishment and strategic reasons for removing or moving troops elsewhere shouldn't be conflated. And the German bases are crucial for American force posture and, in fact, force projection in the Middle East, in Northern Africa, completely regardless of its position in NATO. And I would point to the fact that Germany is continuing to fulfill the 5% defense spending commitments that it made at the Hague summit last year, and in fact has been praised for that only recently by the Director of Policy at the Pentagon. So the truth is, we are actually doing a lot of things, including allowing the US to use our bases, that the US ought to be able to appreciate.
That's what the experts say. But what does the German administration say to all of this? Well, for the most part, they've been stressing that moving troops is a common process, which didn't come as a surprise.
Es gibt ein Kontingent von amerikanischen Soldaten in Europa, die Joe Biden hier noch auf Zeit stationiert hat. Über deren Abzug wird schon seit längerer Zeit gesprochen. Wir haben auch von Joe Biden noch die Zusage bekommen, Tomahawk-Raketen geliefert zu bekommen. Das hat Donald Trump nie wiederholt. Die Zusage hat er uns bisher nicht gegeben. Also da ist jetzt auch nicht alles neu, was wir in den letzten Tagen da hören. Es wird vielleicht ein bisschen zugespitzt, aber neu ist es nicht. Sie dislozieren ihre Truppenteile weltweit immer wieder neu. Und davon sind wir auch betroffen. Das ist in den letzten Jahren immer mal ein Stück rauf und wieder ein Stück runter gegangen. Also wir haben immer noch über 30.000 amerikanische Soldaten in Deutschland stationiert. Und ich gehe davon aus, dass es bei dieser Grundannahme und diesem Grundverständnis zwischen Europa und Amerika auch bleibt.
In regards to the cancelled missile systems, Merz said,
wenn ich es richtig weiß, haben die Amerikaner zurzeit selbst nicht genug. Sie setzen sie ja auch ein. Und insofern sind im Übrigen sehr kostspielige Waffen. Ein Stück alleine kostet $2 Millionen. Wir entwickeln zurzeit auch eigene Systeme in Europa.
Wir könnten das kompensieren?
Im Augenblick noch nicht, aber ich habe in der letzten Woche das Deutsche Heer besucht, war am Donnerstag in Munsterlager auf dem großen Truppenübungsplatz. Ich habe dort eine Vorführung gesehen, von der selbst die Soldaten gesagt haben, sowas hätten sie nicht für möglich gehalten, dass wir in so schneller Zeit so gute, auch im Verbund einsatzfähige Waffensysteme entwickeln, wie wir das da haben, auch mit Drohnen in verschiedensten Konfigurationen. Also wir sind da auf einem ganz guten Weg und ich hoffe, dass wir diesen Weg weitergehen.
And when he was asked if he regrets his public criticism regarding the Iran war, Merz said,
wir haben eine unterschiedliche Betrachtung dieses Krieges. Das ist auch kein Geheimnis. Damit stehe ich nicht allein. Wir haben ein gemeinsames Ziel. Und das Ziel muss lauten, der Iran darf nicht in den Besitz der Atombombe kommen. Und ich finde, zu einer guten Partnerschaft gehört, dass man unterschiedliche Auffassungen gegenseitig respektiert. Ich tue das und ich denke, er tut das auch.
Nee, ich glaube, jetzt akzeptiert es
im Augenblick mal etwas weniger, aber...
Meinen Sie, es ist übermorgen wieder vorbei?
Nochmal, ich gebe die Arbeit am transatlantischen Verhältnis nicht auf und ich gebe auch die Zusammenarbeit mit Donald Trump nicht auf.
German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius emphasized in a public statement that, quote, the presence of American soldiers in Europe and Germany in particular is in the interest of both Germany and the United States. And Johann Wadefuhl, Germany's Minister of Foreign Affairs, said that while the US has indeed made some confusing statements over the last few weeks, he's never doubted the US's commitment to NATO and still considers them a reliable partner.
Nicht jede Maßnahme, nicht jede politische Entscheidung und nicht jede politische Äußerung finden wir richtig, die wir jetzt auch aus Washington hören. Das gehört dazu. Dazu äußern wir uns ja auch, dazu können wir auch unter Partnern unsere Meinung sagen. Aber wenn ich zusammensitze mit meinen Kolleginnen und Kollegen im NATO-Außenministerrat, dann stelle ich fest, wir gehören zusammen, ob wir aus Island kommen, aus der Türkei kommen, aus Deutschland kommen oder aus den USA. Das ist das erfolgreichste Verteidigungsbündnis der Welt. Wir haben ja jetzt in Schweden getagt, gerade erst neues Mitglied, Nachbarland Finnland, gerade erst neu beigetreten. Wir sind größer und stärker, als wir je zuvor waren.
Now, whether the US administration fully agrees with that assessment is up for debate, I would say. When US Secretary of State Marco Rubio attended the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Sweden last week, he repeatedly emphasized that the US was disappointed with how NATO partners responded to the war in Iran. And he said,
I understand NATO is valuable to Europe, and it should be. It also has to be valuable to the United States. So we always have to make that argument, and every administration in every era. And that's what we're in the process of doing now, is explaining, this is the value of NATO to the United States. Related to that is what our force posture is within that alliance, what our contributions are.
Now, I did also ask my German viewers what you guys think about all of this and whether or not this will affect you in any way. And I got a lot of responses from people saying that they most likely won't notice a difference in their everyday lives because they don't live anywhere near a US military base. And that's honestly how it will be for me too. We don't have a military base here in Munich. But I also got a lot of comments from Germans who approve of a troop withdrawal for various reasons. I can't read all of them to you, but here are a few. I would very much welcome us finally becoming as independent as possible, especially when it comes to technology. Europe should remember that, if necessary, we must be able to take care of ourselves on our own. And we've already had several wake-up calls in that regard. Good, the occupation should end and we should finally have a sovereign Germany again, where we can make our own laws and our own decisions, not bowing down to the globo-homo democracy that is America. Wasn't there something about combat drone pilots being stationed on German bases because the distance from the US would create too much latency? They're welcome to withdraw those as well. We can no longer trust the Americans after Trump's Greenland stunt. He's Putin's puppet. Europe has to stand up for its own security, ideally together with the British and the Canadians. The sooner, the better. Even 500,000 troops would not provide security if the US president has repeatedly announced that he would not help in the event of an attack. At the moment, I'm not longer sure whether US troops make me feel safer or more threatened. And a lot of people believe that this will hurt the US just as much or even more than it will hurt Germany. The main damage will be borne by the United States. Of course, it's unfortunate for the affected locations, but many places have already gone through similar situations and managed to adapt. With Trump, you also never know whether he will actually follow through on his announcements. Perhaps there are people in Washington who can make him understand that US troops are not only stationed in Europe as a favor to others. The fact that Putin is benefiting from the current situation is, however, something that can be concerning. Strategically, this is a poor decision for the United States. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment in particular is a unit that could rapidly deploy to NATO's eastern flank to deter or respond to Russian aggression. However, since European NATO states would, in such a scenario, likely not be able to rely on US support under Trump or even a potential President Vance, this should arguably not make a major difference for us. What's most concerning is the signal it sends to Putin. It's also certainly not good for the local economy around the bases. I believe that, as is also the prevailing view in the US Congress, this harms the United States at least as much, if not more. If you consider that a great deal of material and personnel is processed through Germany, not to mention electronic warfare and drone operations, the Americans have a lot to lose here. Of course, 5,000 Americans also mean economic activity, but I see this more as a spiteful reaction by Trump. I live in Rhineland-Palatinate, a federal state that cooperates closely with the US militarily. That's the state that Rammstein is located in. Accordingly, it does make you think, but ultimately I believe the United States would harm itself far more than us by doing this. Here on the ground, cooperation works smoothly on both sides as far as I can tell. Rhineland-Palatinate also continued paying salaries during the government shutdown in the US. The problem is located in Washington, not here. Trump continues to jeopardize alliances and partnerships, thereby primarily weakening America's own position in the world. Europe is strong when it stands together, even without the US, although it will be difficult. Then again, some people believe that this wouldn't be a big change at all. With the withdrawal of 5,000 soldiers, primarily from Fizek, we're back to the exact same numbers from before the Ukraine war. Troops rotate and new ones will come. The 2CR unit was no longer up to date. Its equipment was outdated and also no longer really usable. In recent years, several more or less serious accidents have occurred. My husband was a soldier in this unit. I think the 5,000 are fine and won't harm the United States. The Pentagon will, however, likely prevent Trump from withdrawing significantly more troops. I find it unfortunate. The number is very small, but the symbolic reason for the withdrawal is simply childish and divisive. I hope that German-American relations will improve again soon. What do you guys think of all of this? Let me know in the comments below. But as always, please stay rational and kind, no matter what your point of view is. I would particularly love to hear from people who are in the military themselves. Maybe you're stationed in Germany right now or have been in the past. In that case, what are your thoughts? Or maybe you're in the German military. I wonder how this is talked about in those circles. Put it in the comments, and I hope this video helped provide an overview of what's been going on. If it did, please consider subscribing to this channel, sending a little tip via PayPal, the Super Thanks function here on YouTube, or Ko-fi.com. You can also join my Patreon community, and of course, you can also always watch and listen to my videos as a podcast on Spotify. That's where you can find me on social media. And with that, a big shout out to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope I'll see you next time. Tschüss!